And we are live. Hello, Data Storytellers. This is our new episode with Siddhartha Chatterjee. Well, Sid is a great guy. I met him in London a couple of years ago. We had an interesting conversation, and now we continue on the podcast. Sid is the Chief Data and Analytics Officer, the Head of Data and Analytics at Group ADP. Which is locally known as Aéroport de Paris. Excuse my French; it's not great. It's been a while since I learned it, and I already forgot. But it's basically Paris airports. So, right. Sid, first of all, welcome on the show. It's good to have you here.
Hi, Laszlo. Great to connect with you, and good to catch up after several years when we met for the first time in one of your conferences in London.
Yeah, fantastic. And look, not everyone will know who you are and where you're coming from. So can you just bring the audience up to speed? Can you tell me a little bit about your role right now at Group ADP? What do you do?
Yeah, sure. So I joined Group ADP about 5 years back as head of data and analytics. And I work in the customer division of the company, which is essentially in charge of the entire customer strategy. And the customer for a airport group such as ours is we have got two customer groups. So you have the passengers, millions of passengers who visit our airports, and then you also have the airline companies. But we are very focused on the passenger strategy because that's what has a huge impact on our business and also on our reputations. And ADP Aéroport de Paris is the company which manages all the three airports in Paris, which is Charles de Gaulle, Orly, and Le Bourget. And we also have an international business where we operate about 30 airports globally in different continents.
Okay. And you do have an interesting journey here. So you started off in 2016 as the head of data in digital, and then you also work with data privacy. Can you tell me a little bit about your journey, first of all, of how you got into data, maybe even before Group ADP? What was your journey into the world of data?
Yeah, sure. So I can have a short answer, or I could have a little longish answer. If it's okay with you, maybe I'll come from the beginning.
Yes, please. Yes, please. I'm genuinely interested in what brought you into that very exciting field.
Yeah, sure. So it's an interesting story. It was kind of not completely planned. So I grew up in India. That's where I come from, and we moved around a lot because my father was working in the Indian Air Force. So I ended up changing like 13 schools in about 12 years. So that was my childhood, and then I did my bachelor's in computer science engineering from India. And I was hired by one of the top Indian tech firms to work as a software engineer. This was way back in 2009, and that's when there was the financial recession which was happening in the US, and a lot of the customers of that company were in the US. So they were kind of delaying a little bit the joining date. So in the meanwhile, I kind of thought of maybe applying elsewhere abroad and go for a master's or an MS. And I applied in Europe because my family was already based there. And I got it accepted by a few universities, and I had the opportunity of being selected in one of the European Union Commission master's program. Those days, the topic was called data mining and knowledge management, which was essentially big data and artificial intelligence. But in 2009, nobody used those terms. So I was not very familiar with the domain because I was essentially trained as a software guy with some background in maths and stats and stuff like that. So once we started doing the research about the content of that master in data mining and knowledge management, I quickly realized that it's a field which is sort of core science, and it's going to really grow in the future. And one of the main advantages of data mining and knowledge management was that it applied across all sectors, right? So whether it's from a toothpaste manufacturing company to a cosmetics company to an aviation company, so data mining is something that you require everywhere, and it can have a profound impact in the business. So that's how actually I got into I did that master's for a couple of years, and I did my internship, and from there on, I've been working in France and in Paris for the last 10 years. So
Okay.
that's how I entered the field.
Okay, really cool. And how were the past couple of years for you guys? Obviously, you work in an industry that has been heavily impacted by the pandemic too. So, what have you guys been working on lately?
Yeah, sure. So the COVID has had a huge impact on the entire travel industry, per se. Uh, and ours is at the intersection of three industries, essentially: the tourism sector, the aviation, and also the retail, because we have huge retail operations within the airport. So 2020 was quite difficult because there was a massive drop in passenger traffic numbers. We had to kind of shut down a lot of our terminals and activities. And from there on, about 6 months later, it's been steadily coming up, and now it's coming up a lot. The traffic is going back again because people want to travel, and the rules are getting slightly easier by the day. So to answer your question, I mean, we need to reinvent the whole travel space, right, including the retail space. And this is a phenomena which is happening all over across all industries. So the prime concern for for the travel sector is to give the confidence back to the customers or the consumers. Right? So they need to have confidence to be able to travel in security, peacefully, etc. Without having those extra stresses around sanitary protocols and things like that. And another objective is how can you provide them with the right information, right? So that's where data also comes into play, because you need to have very high quality information that you are able to give them through the digital, even if they are not traveling, through the digital, trying to keep the contact with your customer base for as long as possible. And lastly, because of the economic crisis, which has taken place due to the health crisis, so we also need to optimize all our processes and our operations, relook at the offering that we provide at the retail, the kind of services that we provide. So that's where also you have artificial intelligence, which comes into play. For example, we've been optimizing our call centers, because even though people were not taking flights, but they had already tickets booked, so they kept calling us to get information, and they were in a panic state of mind. So we had like huge surge in calls. So that's where we looked at AI, because the humans were not able to tackle this kind of traffic which was coming, to kind of automate certain redundant questions and things like that. So there's lots of areas where where we work, and especially, I mean, the COVID crisis has kind of changed all the priorities. So we need to now go by the new priorities and help in reinventing the travel sector.
And what ultimately earns you the mandate that you have now as chief data officer? I think when we met in London, and that was, I think, in 2019, maybe you were already in that role, or did you just were you just fresh in that new responsibility back in 2019?
Yeah, so I was, this was in 2019, right? We met in 2019.
I think 2019. Yeah, we had a lot of events around the time, but I think it was maybe beginning of 2019.
Yeah, true. So so I joined the company end of 2016 or early 2017. And my first mandate was to really help the digital transformation of the company by using data and analytics, and putting data and analytics at the center of our digital transformation. And within the digital transformation, we had lots of topics such as e-commerce and loyalty program and CRM and digital interfaces with our customers. And every couple of years or year or so, we kept onboarding more and more business units to collaborate with us on the data analytics. So eventually we started working with the aviation marketing department, the retail, the parking departments, and also a lot of work with the operations department, in order to work on the passenger fluidity, or the seamless door-to-door experience of our passengers within our 30 different airports. And lately I've been also working more on internationally to help our other airports, which are part of the group, to kind of export the expertise that we have gained over the last 5 years.
Gotcha. So I would like to understand a little bit more about the challenges that you had along the journey. Maybe a good starting point would be that presentation that we just talked about before we started recording from Cosmondo from KLM. So when you attended, we had different case studies that we looked at during the day that you guys could have some intimate conversations around. Cosmondo talked about organizational management and getting funding for different projects, really enabling the business through value in data and making them see and perceive data in a different way that made them more receptive and just more willing to invest in data. So first of all, why did you find that presentation? I know it's been a while, but why did you find the presentation useful?
For one, it was a presentation of a colleague from Air France, which is one of our main clients with whom we work and who get us a chunk of the passengers who use our airports. That was one. And secondly, there was a lot of content around organization and how they organize their their data teams and how they got budgets, etc. So which was sort of interesting for me at that point, because I had started the journey, whereas he was already, I guess, 3 or 4 years in the journey. So there were some pointers to take home, and then we kept in touch for a while. Eventually, I think we moved on different projects, but then it was good to get how Air France was working on this topic.
Yeah, Cosmondo is also a great guy, and so when we talk about the journey of organizational management, as you moved into these roles, what were the biggest challenges for you on that road? What were the bottlenecks for you as a professional? So I'm less interested in the company at large, but I'm very interested in hearing your perspective. So what were your main challenges on the journey?
Yeah, sure. And before I answer that question, I think you had asked me also about my role as in the privacy topic. So I do manage the GDPR compliances for my department, which is the customer department, and I kind of work closely with the data privacy officer. So which is interesting, because that way you have sort of one foot in the in the compliance, and the other one which is more aggressive, which is on taking advantage of your data assets. So it kind of helps you to keep a balance on the domain. Now coming back to your question about the challenges that I faced. So challenges are multiple, and I can talk about the challenges at ADP. But then prior to ADP, I was working in the in the marketing and communications industries, such as Ogilvy and Publicis, where it was a totally different ball game, because I was more on the consulting side, and we had to work with clients and we had to convince them the value of data analytics and semantic analysis and stuff like that. So that was quite useful actually when I actually arrived at an enterprise like ADP, which has its own business, and the main objective is to optimize and create value for your own operations. So the fact of having done that for multiple companies in my prior jobs was useful to start working with the internal stakeholders. But first and foremost, the challenge is obviously to position yourself. I mean, I mentioned to you, one of the reasons I joined this field is because it's a core science and it's applicable everywhere. Like, let's say, economics or finance, or you can also take the example of steel. Steel is if you, in the earlier days, I mean, that's something which is kind of used everywhere, right? Now with digital, it has less value, but in the physical world, steel was kind of a core science. So I look at data in a similar fashion. But that's not the case with everybody else, right? So all the stakeholders. So they need to understand what your role is and why does your department exist within the company, and how can you bring value to the stuff that they're already doing, because
Mhm.
data is not something which is new, right? So we've been, companies have been analyzing data and using data for ages. So what's
Mhm.
this whole data scientist role, or data analytics division? So you need to be very clear about your value proposition, and once that value proposition is clear, then you need to explain it to your other stakeholders. And I think the foremost challenge is to gain trust. So you need to gain that trust, and because
Mhm.
once you gain that trust within the organization, from your different colleagues and your stakeholders, then it becomes much easier. And secondly, I think one of the biggest challenges, and I think it's across all companies, is to put in place a good governance, right?
Mhm.
Governance has many areas around it. For me, I look at governance from basically 3 or 4 point of views. One is the governance of the technology, which is very important, because even though technology is a means to achieve what we want to achieve using data, but it is still a very vital component, right? Without the technology, you can't go forward. So that's where you need a proper governance with your IT department, and with the other people who can, where you have a consensus about the right tools and solutions that you want to use going ahead. Then the second for me is the governance around business cases, right?
Mhm.
Because you can always, I mean, when you talk with your stakeholders and you want to collaborate with them, I mean, they will have ideas, you will have ideas, and you need to come to a consensus, and you need to come up with the right business cases, use cases, which will potentially be successful, and you need to prioritize them, right? So that's where the governance of coming up with use cases, business cases, and the priorities. So that's
Mhm.
something which is very important, and that is something that you need to create bottom up, right? So you can't you can't impose your ideas on your stakeholders. So you need to let them talk, express. You need to figure out all their pain points, and from there it is a bi-directional communication, where you brainstorm, you interact, and you come up with these use cases, these mission critical use cases.
Mhm.
So the technology piece, and then the use cases piece, the priorities, and then for me comes the topic of collaboration, right? And that's where you need a very strong governance around collaboration. And for me, collaboration has to be co-creation, right? So it cannot be completely centralized, where my department is building up the products and then just delivering it like vendors.
Mhm.
But then we really want the business stakeholder to collaborate on this process. And at times, it's not just the internal stakeholders. We also work with the external stakeholders, partners. A company is a culmination of employees and partners and customers, right? So we also work with partners, and when we work with partners, we ask them to exchange information, data with us, and then we ask them to collaborate with us on the products that we want to build, which can get value out of it. And the fourth one is the governance around the finance part and the ROI, which is again, and it gets me back to that presentation of Cospando at Air France,
Mhm.
where it explained how can you get funding for your projects. And I think the first 3 points that I mentioned, technology, business cases, priorities, and the collaboration, enables you to build that storytelling, for your higher management to then unlock those budgets, right?
Mhm.
Yeah. So
That makes perfect sense. So there's just so much to talk about here. I took a bunch of notes. So of course, when you want to communicate the vision, you want to gain trust, and then even the question of governance, apart from the very specific technological pieces, this is all about people. This is all about getting through to people and making them change not only how they see data and how they see the connection between data and their own work, but actually getting them to make decisions in your favor. So there's that central idea of storytelling. Storytelling is kind of like a buzzword we know very well, but there's something real underneath storytelling, and you don't tell stories for the sake of telling stories. You tell storytelling. You tell stories to be persuasive, and you tell them with intention. So what were the main pitfalls you think? So when you, first of all, try to communicate that vision to the stakeholders and you try to get trust, looking back, if you reflect on your journey, what were the main pitfalls in this, and what makes this whole process effective, and what should people who are aspiring to a similar position to where you are now, what should they take into strong consideration, what should they prioritize, and what should they aim to avoid?
Yeah, sure. So the keyword that you used is people, right? And I'm fully I'm fully with you on this one. I totally agree. It's a totally a people's game, and this is where there's also the topic of culture, right? The culture is so important, and the data-driven culture or the data literacy. I mean, there are so many terms, and one of the ways to drive that culture is not to use too many buzzwords, because that confuses people. Yeah, so the pitfalls is often around the promise, right? I mean, and for me, there are two aspects. If you want to be successful in the data analytics journey, there are two aspects which are very important. One is talent, right? So you need to be able to attract the talent. So here it's again people, and to attract, one of the best ways to attract talent is to have exciting projects for your team members, and those exciting projects can only be given to you from the stakeholders or the business units, right? Right. So and the business units stakeholders, what they expect is how you going to bring value to them without actually increasing their workload, and that's a very important aspect, because I mean, often teams are small and lean, and they already have huge amounts of existing missions and objectives. So your proposition has to be quite sharp, and it has to start small. You need to show them value, and it has to be something small that you eventually start scaling up, where they actually see the value. It can be very simple stuff like just automating maybe some analysis that they do on Excel, and over a period of time they have too much of data on their Excels, and they have too much of macros, etc. So you just automate that, and that's very quickly, it can bring some value to them. You can set up a small report, interactive report, and then step by step you can say, all right, okay, now we have this report, we have automated your process. Why not let's try a predictive model, and then try and predict the sales that you're going to generate next 6 months, right? Then there'll be a lot of questions. Oh, prediction is it's not so reliable in our case because there are so many factors, these factors. So that's again, so you need to be proactive, and you need to be constantly in a mindset of service, because we are essentially a support organization, right? So we don't sell data, right? So our product is not data. So our department is existing in order to make other departments more efficient and make them look good. So that's another important point. So you should try and make your internal stakeholders look good, right, and look smarter. And everything that you can do to give them that service. And at times maybe you need to do the work for them, because you need to train them. You need to provide them with very solid guidelines. So I think that's one of the ways that you can get that trust, and you can overcome those pitfalls while onboarding stakeholders.
This is great stuff, because it's all connected, right? So in order to get good talent, which will enable you to do strong work, then it's to get exciting projects. How do you get exciting projects? Well, of course, it comes from the business. So I'm just kind of reiterating what you said, because I find it really useful. So it comes from the business. Now, the business will give you exciting projects only if you earned it. And during that process of earning it, well, you need to start small, and you got to have that sharp proposition. But during that process, you will generate the trust too. And ultimately, as you do this, you're building this asset, this almost library of success stories, which will help you to get better talent, but also now you have trust in the business, so everything will become easier. And this is exactly why we like to focus on these key elements that will give you a great return on your investment if you do the right things. That's fantastic. So the next part is when you mentioned even good governance and having these strong use cases. How do you make sure that you communicate this well to the business? Have you identified any best practices during your career of effective communication of success stories?
Yeah, absolutely. So what I have realized or understood during my experience is that you need to rely on communities, right? Because often, I mean, data organizations or departments, they're a handful of people, right? Maximum 10, 15, 20. Whereas within an enterprise you have thousands and thousands of people. So it's impossible for a core group of individuals to communicate all your success stories, etc., to all these employees. So you need to build communities, and then and those communities need to be hybrid communities. So you just can't have group of geeks or techies within that community. So you need to have business people, you need to have legal people, you need to have technical people, technologists, etc. And then make them your advocates. Make them your advocates, and they are the ones who are going to go and communicate to their colleagues and their colleagues, etc. And they'll say, hey, look at look at that department. I mean, they automated all the reports. They have now an automated predictive model that allows them to go faster in the work. So then you're going to get a a new customer on board who's going to ask you for the same thing. And but eventually what will happen is that you'll start getting once you are able to diffuse the success stories across the company, then the inbound demand starts increasing, and that's where you got to be very careful of not to not to disappoint people, right? So that's where the initial governance around priorities, etc., is very important. And you need to take your time before you start building stuff, or you start investing in certain areas. And often it's underlooked. It's not given enough importance, the whole process of of doing rigorous planning and rigorous defining the problem before you start working on it. So and all of this is a vicious, it's not a vicious cycle, sorry, it's like a cycle, as you rightly summarized it just before. You start small and you show value, and when you start small, the advantage is that the risk of failure is little, right? So we kind of work, we've come up with a concept. I mean, it's a common concept called MVP. So whenever we start a project, so we say that we'll work in MVP mode, minimum viable product. And I mean a data product over here, and you'll be surprised. I mean, the one MVP, at times it could be as small as a week of effort, and within that week also you're working on other stuff, right? So we say, okay, we'll go for it, we'll give it a week, we'll see if something something viable comes out of it. If not, we stop, right? So managing expectations is extremely important, and I think that's the key, because if you engage a certain stakeholder on a very long period of time, and eventually the thing doesn't work and everybody has invested too much money, too much effort, then they don't want to come back and do the same thing again. So so learn fast, fail fast. I think that really helps over here.
So this was so good that you mentioned the inbound request, because that's the position that you want to be in. The inbound requests also signals to you that now people have trust in data, they have expectations, they're excited about it, and it's a good position to be in, because you don't need to chase down people and you don't need to try and make look useful, because they are already coming to you. Fantastic. But again, you got to earn it. And this whole idea about building
that's a journey, and that's a journey, before that inbound request starts to flowing in. I mean, that takes time, and you need to be very careful not to fail at that aspect, because if not, then you'll always be in the outbound mode, right? Always going and persuading people to work with you.
Exactly. And you mentioned that the key to that, or one of the keys, is to have good business cases that you can then diffuse in the business. Now, I took a note here, which was really important, about how to make sure that you invest in the right project. And one of the keys here is to identify pain points, business pain points, because you need to build it from bottom up. Okay. How do you do that? How do you identify the right pain points? And maybe here, if you want, you can get a little bit more technical of, okay, this is how I identify the right stakeholder, the right user, and then this is my approach to getting into their head and identifying their right desires and goals, and then really connecting that to something that I can offer. So can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. This is a very important aspect, and to be honest, it's not easy, and there is no one way path to identifying that pain point. One of the ways, and especially when you're starting small, I spoke about my journey where we started with the digital transformation, then we started working on other aspects eventually. Just give me a second. I need
Sure,
to close.
take your time.
Yeah, so the advantage of of starting focused and then starting small and eventually scaling up is that you start with one pain point, and then you, what I call is a linked pain points, right? So there's you're working on this particular problem. I'm kind of thinking of an example. Let's say you're trying to work on how do you improve your media targeting, on SEA on Google or something like that, right? So you work on that and you try and see, how can you use data to optimize that, and then you suddenly come across the fact that my media I can optimize, but actually there is some problem in the customer journey on the website, right? So there's no point targeting with good keywords if your website experience is shit, right? So then you can go and talk with the people who are in charge of the of the, let's say, the customer journey, and then you tell them that, look, I'm working on this media optimization problem, and I thought that maybe there's some aspect on the customer journey that we can improve on the digital. What do you think, right? So this I call it a linked pain point, right? And from there you can figure out that the products that you're selling, there is some pricing issue, or or there is an inventory optimization problem. So you keep going one at a time. Another way of identifying pain points is going by the company KPIs or metrics. So every company has certain objectives, annual objectives, etc. And you'll always find certain KPIs which are the most impactful, right, for the entire company performance. And then you can identify who are the people who are driving those KPIs, right? And how can you, as a data analytics expert, bring value to them to optimize or to accelerate the performance of their KPIs, right? So that is more. This is less of a linked pain point, but it's more proactively you're searching for operational excellence or business excellence. So essentially you go and ask to your stakeholder as to how you can help them achieve excellence. And eventually in that discussion they themselves come up with their pain points, and you understand that, okay, even before I try and improve the global KPI, there are many sub pain points which has to be solved. So it's better to tackle those first rather than attacking the bigger problem, which will eventually come through. So you have to have an open mindset that what you think, I mean, don't be shy of expressing it or sharing it, but 80 or 90% of the times you will be wrong, and the business stakeholder will actually re-guide you towards the right pain point, right? So that's where it's a bit like learning a language. When I came to France and I learned French, so somebody told me that don't be shy of making a fool of yourself, when you want to learn a language. So go out there and make mistakes, and people will correct you, and then you will find the right formula.
That's actually a great pivot to the whole collaboration and co-creation aspect, because as you get on the same page with the business, as you bridge that language barrier, basically, collaboration is all about that, like speaking the same language so you can move towards the same goal. You will have shared goals, but also diverse perspectives, so that can make that collaboration really fruitful. Can we talk a little bit more about this, like collaboration? And you mentioned something about co-creation. How can you make people really invested in this? What are the keys to consider? And you want to bring people along with you on the journey.
So the co-creation piece is super important for me from the aspect of domain knowledge.
Mhm.
right? So sometimes, I mean, the kind of problems on which we work involves multiple domains. I'll give you an example of airport advertising. So we do advertising within the airport. So you've got these digital screens all over the airport, and then we have brands who sort of buy inventory, and then they do campaigns, and the goal of these campaigns is to generate more sales in our shops, right? So when you look at this problem, there's multiple areas that you're trying to juggle with. So one is an advertising related problem. So how do you optimize your the screen inventory? Then you have a retail problem, is that is your campaign enough optimized enough or targeted enough to drive people drive more sales within the retail outlets. And the last one is more linked to the passenger flow, or operational efficiency of how easily and how are people moving within the airport, right? So you've got these different areas that you need to kind of uncover, and data is at the center, obviously. So this is where co-creation is very important, where you bring in an operational expert, who has a domain knowledge about the passenger flow, and then you work with the partner who actually supplies you the digital screens, and who launches the campaigns, and they have extensive knowledge about the advertising at the airport and in outdoor advertising. And we are data analytic experts, and we have sort of transversal knowledge about different topics.
Mhm.
So this is where co-creation becomes very useful, because each one has very important inputs to give during the whole process, right? Sometimes we have data scientists from different teams coming together and collaborating on the same product, because every data scientist is more close to the domain area on which he's working, right? So this
Mhm.
is where if you collaborate, and if it is not a centralized approach, you make less mistakes, and eventually the return on investment is much higher, because everyone is bringing value on his own
Mhm.
expertise. And often when we work with the business units, I mean, we kind of try and make them the product owners, right? The products that we are building or the value that we are bringing them, if they can become owners of that product, then they will help a lot to drive the whole journey of that product, and make that product long lasting, with a continuous improvement strategy. This is where the co-creation aspect is extremely important.
Mhm.
uh, Certain things need to be very centralized, and there has to be discipline, and that's on the data. So you want the data to be at the same place, so that it is accessible to everybody. It is in a quality which is acceptable. Otherwise what you build will not have value.
Mhm.
And then you need to have guidelines around this collaboration, and around the products, etc., that you're building within this governance framework. So as long as your data is centralized, your tools are available, and the access to that data is fast and timely, then I mean, you can always bring in more people, and then collaborate with them to take advantage basically of expertise of each individual and partner.
And this ties so nicely into the whole idea of thinking about yourself as a support function, which you are, and having that mindset of service, because then you can just focus on what you need to set the your customers ultimately within the business up for success in order to make them look good. And if they are invested in that, you can really just enhance that effect. So this ties into the question of relationships. So long term, now you had enough time also at Group ADP. How did all this affect your relationships within the company with key stakeholders? And what are the opportunities that open up from being able to leverage those?
Yeah, absolutely. So I spoke about when we spoke about the people aspect, and we spoke about talent, and how can you recruit, how can you attract talent, and to attract high quality talent, you need to have amazing projects for them, and these projects you can actually create unless you cannot create unless and until you have profound deep relationship across the company, across the business units, right? Because they are the one who are running the company on a daily basis. So you need to have and that relationship cannot purely be sort of technical, or let's say service oriented, where even though we do look at ourselves as a support organization trying to provide service, but at the same time we need to be or behave like business leaders, business leader, and that's extremely important quality to have. And this is where a data function is different from, let's say, an IT function, is because people expect your function to to provide service, but also have that business leader mindset, right, where you're able to understand the business, right? So through the communities and through the interactions that you make with the key stakeholders, it cannot always be centered around data, right? So this is also a big learning process for the organization. Our team, for myself included, is to be constantly in the process of understanding the business of a stakeholder, right? And from that, obviously, you start building strong relationships, and then and you also build up a strong network, right? And this network is internal, it's also external. We also try and take inspiration from our peers in in other companies, in other sectors, etc., to understand how they organize themselves, how they set up their governance, what are the success stories, etc. So deep, profound relationships is extremely important, to be able to run this function effectively, and there's no two ways around it. And it's not all it's not always easy. I mean, at times you may have difficult situations, or conflicts, let's say, on certain areas, but the only way to get around this is through effective communication. So that's something which is extremely vital, because the end objective is to impact that culture, to mold that culture, and to bring in change, right? And change is not always smooth, so you may have thorns and rough edges, etc., and you need to overcome it. But the best tool is communication. So even if you're in a difficult situation, I mean, you need to be frank and open about it, and not let that come in the way of the progress that you want to make, right? So you got to be open about it, and maybe just inform the set of individuals that, look, it's not working, maybe there's a problem in communication, or understanding on this project or otherwise, etc. So how can we solve it, right? If you don't do that, then eventually you're going to shut down opportunities, and you won't get to that level that you're looking you would like to reach.
No, that makes perfect sense. And this actually brings me to something that we kind of found during this exploration, during our work as investigative journalists in the data world, which is this Trinitarian structure of storytelling. Let me explain. So this is really about storytelling having three key elements. One is the storyteller, then you have the person you're telling the story to, your audience, and you have the story shared between them. So we talk a lot about what makes a good story, what makes communication effective and powerful and colorful, and also talk about how to connect with your audience in an authentic way, how to apply empathy to understand what they actually need and what are their pain points. But the storyteller, so you as a leader, is just as important. And you mentioned here that you got to be a business leader. So can you say a few words about what virtues you think makes a good business leader? The word virtue really just means good habit. I think the original Greek word means both habit and character. Right? That's what a virtue is. It's a habit. It's a positive habit of character. So what do you think makes a good data leader who has compelling leadership presence?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think for the little difference of a data leader versus any other business leader is that a data leader also should be a business leader with a strong technical know-how. So if you're able to juggle between the two, it's icing on the cake. But one of the main virtues or the two virtues, I think, is the ability to motivate people, motivate your team. You can take inspiration from the way the military functions, right? So a leader needs to motivate his men. So similarly, I think a data leader needs to motivate his teams, motivate his stakeholders, etc. And needs to be extremely persuasive. I think persuasive and positive persuasive is very important, because you're not going to get what you want very easily. And because this role is so much oriented around change, and in order to create that change, you need to create that positive environment, motivate people, be persuasive, and be extremely results oriented, because there's no point on trying to create change without clear results objectives, in order to really balance between innovation and business. So you need to have that innovation side to you, but not at the cost of the business, right? Yeah. So I think these are the main aspects. Along with that, obviously, anything to do with creativity and strategic inclinations, they go a long way. But I look at this whole job as a chief change agent, for the company, and how good you are at creating change, breaking silos. I mean, you asking about challenges. I think siloed data, within organizations is a big challenge. Time to market is a big challenge. You may have the right ideas, but you may not get the people onboarded at the right time, to have the right time to market. So anything to do around inspiring, motivating, persuading, yeah, I think that can go a long way, along with the strategic and the technical know-how.
Absolutely. I remember in the army, we were always told when we studied military leadership that a lot of people think that leadership is about telling people what to do. Well, if that was what leadership was, that you tell people what to do and they do it, then leadership would be the easiest thing in the world. And it's anything but, So it starts with developing the right virtues, the right posture, and the right habits. And on that note, because I also want to be respectful of your time. I think our hour just expired. But what would be your final word of advice for aspiring data leaders? If you wanted to find a few key points to focus on as we move into the decade of data, and there will be just so many opportunities. There will be a lot of winners here, but unfortunately, there will be also realistically losers who fail to capitalize on that. What would you advise them to focus on and prioritize to make the most of that potentially lucrative decade for all of us in data?
Yeah, absolutely. And the decade is going to be extremely promising. I mean, if you look at one of the reasons that the field has taken off is because of the digitalization and the data deluge that has happened over the last few years, and the pandemic has just accelerated it, right? So everything is going online, everything is going digital. So that's going to create more and more sources of data and volumes of data. There's going to be more and more need of automation in business processes, and more innovation using AI. The governments are also now taking a look seriously. The French government is investing billions of dollars in artificial intelligence and data analytics, etc. And also at the European level, there are certain interesting strategies coming up on the European digital strategy, on the European data strategy. So, I mean, for sure, in the next decade, this field is going to only grow exponentially. And with that, obviously, there'll be a lot of challenges which will come about. One of the things that I felt was really useful in my journey is also to have the ability to be hands-on, right? So it's a small point, but it goes a long way, right? So unless and until as a data leader, if you don't enjoy the whole process of actually working with the data from the collection, data generation point to the whole layers of process analysis, delivery, and then the the actual activation of that data, you don't appreciate that process. And as a data leader, I think uh, you need to be hands-on technically for sure, but also be hands-on on the actual business side, right? So I felt that, whenever I have taken time to go and be on the field, on the retail operations, or let's say the airport operations, going and being hands-on, understanding the processes, working with the people who are actually in charge. I mean, that has a huge value, because over a period of time, the most of the tasks that we perform today are going to be automated, right? So you'll have automated machine learning, you'll have automated data collection, governance, etc. So what is the data leader going to do, or the data scientist going to do, right? So, and that's the time when people will actually look at data scientists as people who are able to orchestrate these automated systems, but first and foremost have that domain knowledge, right? And they're going to look at our tribe as a tribe who's able to create the bridges, bridges between the technology and between the business, right? And bring about change. So along with the soft skills that you explained, I think being hands-on and understanding the business, understanding the operations, and also playing around on the technical side of things, along with all the things required to bring in that change. I think if you keep your focus on that, and especially having that mindset where you want to start small, try and fail quickly, and then try and scale it up from there. I think it's going to be a very exciting time for all experts around the world.
100%. And absolutely, I think you made a very good observation there, that the soft skills are very important, but they are mainly the enablers for you to really leverage your technical knowledge and achievements, right? Because that's the soft skills, and the communication, the effective communication and the relationship building will remove obstacles from you, and will also enable you to make the most of what you've already built and your experience and knowledge. Fantastic. It was a great interview, Sid. Thank you very much for your insights. Hope the audience enjoyed the conversation as well as I have. And Sid, we hope to see you on the show soon.
Thank you so much, Laszlo, for the invitation, and it was a pleasure to talk to you, and hope to meet you soon.